I was a solitary child, a skinny little thing with long pigtails. They were French braids. My grandmother used to put those French braids into my hair. She'd braid them so tight it felt like my cheekbones went around behind my ears. And I didn't know how to get along with people very well. I dressed in black by choice, and I had weird pets. I had a napping turtle, and I had a bat that my dad caught for me once, a little bat. And I had a horned toad. And I stayed in trees a lot because I didn't know how to get along with the other kids. I read all the time. And I made up my own friends that I played with, all imaginary, and I spent a lot of time in my grandmother's gardens. My grandmothers were as different as two women could be, and their gardens almost told a story. My grandmother Rosalie's garden, that's my father's mother, was in the mountains up on Grimes Creek, where I live now. And it was tangled and wild, a lot of it, and she went for the color and the smell a lot. There were 3 rows of delphinium, like big, fat, blue pieces of the sky that were nearly as tall as the door. And right in front there was a row of oriental poppies, just a blaze of scarlet. It was stunning. And we used to play games with the old-fashioned flowers that grew all around there, the hollyhocks and bachelor's buttons. We'd make little dolls out of them, and we'd bury a tub, one of those big galvanized tubs, halfway down in the sand, and then just hide the whole thing with leaves, and we'd build a bridge across it, and we'd put these dolls on the bridge and then make up stories about where this was and what they were doing there. My other grandmother, Arabelle Bear Kelly, lived on the farm in Twin Falls. And her garden was just incredibly orderly. And what I remember the best about it is what came out of it, I guess, except for the flower garden, which was really her only conceit, her only way of enjoying herself and having a social life was all wrapped up in that garden. She used to raise dahlias that were as big as my head, and she'd win prizes with them every year at the fair. And she used to have her friends over on Tuesdays, and they'd sit and drink tea, and they'd talk about how to get your dahlias to grow as big as your granddaughter's head. My grandfather never developed a sensibility about how important that was to her. He was a wild-eyed Irish atheist. My grandfather, James Madison Kelly. He was so handsome. I think that's probably been the center of the problems I've always had with love, is that I was hopelessly in love with my grandfather, and I'm always looking for someone like him and never finding them. He was kind of wicked, and he had a truly wicked Irish sense of humor. And my mother told me a wonderful story about how one time my grandmother had her friends over, and they were drinking tea and talking about how to get your dahlias to grow so big. And he came in off the fields, just covered with sweat and manure and dirt. It was a hot day, probably August. He came in for a nice lemonade in the heat of the day. And he poured it. And he draped his good-looking self in the door and regarded the ladies. My grandfather loved Shakespeare. He even cursed at the horses in Shakespearean language. And he just couldn't repress some of the things that popped out of his mouth. These ladies were older, and one of them was a Mrs. Cathro, a lovely Scottish lady with a a sweet lilt to her voice. And she made the best potato salad I ever tasted. I remember that about her. But in addition to that, she had on her chin a really interesting growth. It was quite large. And out of it grew 7 corkscrew curly hairs, each one a slightly different color. I thought it was really wonderful, but I never would have mentioned it. Nobody would have but him. So he sipped his lemonade, and then, in his best Macbethian voice, he said, "Who are these so withered and so wild, who look not of this earth and yet are on it? They must be women, but their beards forbid it to be such." My mother says my grandmother cried for 2 hours. And after she was finally done with that, she sobbed out, "Oh, God, if I only could have told him he was drunk. But everybody knows Jim never touches a drop." Well, I wrote the song, "The Bells of Ireland," for my grandmother's gardens and for the Irish in my whole family. It runs through in every direction. There was a flower in both those gardens and in my garden now that I always thought was magic. It's because the blossom's green. It's a stock flower, a little like a delphinium maybe, but the blossom's green. And it looks a little like a horn. It looks a little as though if you put your lips to it, you might be able to play a tune on it. And that you could hear the horns of Elfland faintly blowing. And when you dry it, it becomes a lovely wheat color, but it keeps the green heart almost to the end of its life. And the song is for my grandmother's gardens and for the green heart of an Irish fool.
These are the bells of Ireland that in my garden grow. My great-grandmother brought those seeds from Ireland long ago. The music, it is wild and sad, like orphan angels sing. You must listen in your soul to hear the bells of Ireland ring. My mother's father had the look of Ireland's heroes bold. Strong, broad shoulders, raven eyes to look into your soul. My father's mother's face was a map of the roads Maeve's feet had trod. Rose of the world, I'm named for her. Lord, I love her, lost old sod. And these are the bells of Ireland that in my garden grow. My great-grandmother brought those seeds from Ireland long ago. The music, it is wild and sad, like orphan angels sing. You must listen in your soul to hear the bells of Ireland ring. I've never been to Ireland, though I sing at the cool green shores, and I dream I must have lived there some century before. And I'll weep for the blood and the troubles, and I'll tend my garden well. Let the sweet green bells of Ireland ring the bells of hell. And these are the bells of Ireland that in my garden grow. My great-grandmother brought those seeds from Ireland long ago. Ah, the music, it is wild and sad.